My name is Glen Shok. I'm VP of Alliances at Panzura, and with me we have Russ Catalano. Russ, say hi.
Hello, everyone.
Thanks again for joining. Again, public, private, or hybrid, how to make good cloud decisions. And I am going to kick this off. So again, this is part of a webinar series that Panzura is doing with our alliances partners. The goal of this is to be additive. We have recordings of the previous ones on Panzura's website. We're hoping not to go over the same information across all of them. We're hoping to give you new information. And in this one with IBM, we're going to be talking about what a good cloud migration strategy looks like, what all of your options actually are, and why you would choose one path over another. So why are you moving the cloud? And why are there so many cloud options and all of those things? You've outgrown legacy storage. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, is the fact that you've outgrown and you're looking at moving, do digital transformation. You're looking at costs and what are the total cost of ownership associated with storage, as well as how to democratize your data, how to get your data to where it needs to be so that you can actually use it, run analytics, and all of those things without too much human intervention. So number one is that you've outgrown your legacy storage. And what that means is you have traditional unstructured data systems, traditional filers sitting on premises. They're running out of performance on the front end or on the back end, and you have to buy another one and another one and another one, and you got to manage it, and you got to back it up, and you got to remote replicate it. And they're all managed as silos. So basically, I'm talking about technology that existed over 20 years ago that's still being sold today, a little bit faster, actually a lot bit faster at the edge, but it's still individually managed and it's not very cost effective. And it should absolutely be easier. And leveraging a public or a private or a hybrid cloud may be the solution. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Also, digital transformation on the tip of the tongue of every C-level person in your company. What does digital transformation actually mean? How do we convert those old applications into a newer generation of application? And how do I do that more efficiently? How do I do it quicker? How do I get more money back from it? And basically, what's the most efficient way to utilize storage as part of the digital transformation process? What are the different cloud types? So first, we have public cloud. That's your traditional AWS, Azure, Google, IBM has a public cloud offering. And that's basically throwing all of your data in a cloud, in a region, using cloud native applications to access it, or putting your legacy applications on a VM in the cloud and accessing it there. We've all heard of the horror stories with regards to migrating, like, let's say, a single application into the cloud that is dependent on other applications that are still sitting in your data center. And with that dependency, what you find is failed cloud migrations because of the latency between the thing that you move to the cloud and those that are still on premises. And someone that's been doing this sort of work for a very long time, I've seen this happen over and over again. And then that's when, usually my companies get called in to repair that sort of thing. Private cloud is basically doing that type of on-demand access to data and bringing up services considerably quicker than going the old-fashioned way, but still having on-premises object stores, for example, such as IBM Cause, and Panzura as a global file system, which we're going to talk about today, to bring up services a lot quicker for your end users, but everything is housed within your various own private data centers. There's the government version of a dark cloud so that everything stays local, no internet access, no internet connectivity. So those tend to be self-encased clouds. But again, you still have the ability to bring up whatever services you want considerably quicker, but there's no internet connectivity to the edge. And then finally, hybrid. So it's a mixture of on-premises as well as in the cloud workloads. So you can still have, let's say, IBM's object storage on premises, but you can put a VM into Google of Panzura, which we're going to talk about how to deploy, and connect it to the on-premises object store as a back-end storage so that you have cloud native access, such as analytics and all that, to the data that's sitting within your global file system. So those are kind of like your four different options for deploying the kind of cloud functionality that folks are looking for today to solve the previous problems we talked about. Which one's right for you? It really depends on the kind of workload that you are looking to deploy. So let's go through a few scenarios. And again, who is Panzura? We are an unstructured data company. And what that means is we provide a global file system at the edge, and all locations have the capability of seeing exactly the same data structure. we install on premises via VMDK or Hyper-V. So basically we install an image that needs CPU, we need memory, and then we need local NVMe for caching data at the edge so that we're able to cache hot data at the edge. Our back end, right? Because if you think of this as a traditional NAS system, traditional NAS systems have the filer front end, and then they have storage as the back end. Panzura doesn't sell storage, even though we're a storage company, right? We sell that front end filer, but on the back end, we are compatible with any kind of object store that has S3 front end compatibility. So an example of that is IBM COS, the Cloud Object Storage backend, which is an on-premises implementation of an object store that Russ will be talking about shortly. So if we want to use that as the example, in San Francisco, in New York, and then in a cloud, we can install, and by the way, we are installable as a VM in all the clouds. We're available in all the marketplaces, such as Amazon, Google, Azure. But keep in mind that VM would connect to your on-premises object store. And in that case, you can have cloud native access to all of your data that is in the global file system. What's unique about us is the fact that even though we are bifurcating the head from the backend storage, and the head, our filer head, can be far away from the backend object store, we provide the same kind of local performance as you would expect from any traditional edge NAS system. And that's because we know something about NAS, and that is 90% of your unstructured data goes unused. So that 90% is just going to sit there on inexpensive IBM Cloud Object Store, and the 10%, depending on how many sites you have, is going to end up being distributed. Now, of course, it's also sitting in the object store, but it's going to be cached at the edges. So we end up caching at the edge somewhere between 0.5% to 1.5%, depending on the workload of your total storage. And that's going to get distributed amongst every implementation of your Panzura filer, so that our customers that have 2 sites, 3 sites, 10 sites, 20 sites, all feel that they're getting the exact same kind of performance that they did from our predecessors prior to implementing the Panzura global file system. Other neat things that differentiate us. One of the previous slides says that you're still doing things the old-fashioned way with traditional unstructured data at the edge, such as remote replication, backups, and handling disaster recovery. As Russ will talk about, IBM Cloud Object Store has the concept of erasure coding. So you can basically put these devices in multiple locations, and they work together to create a single pool of storage. But if one location goes down and that becomes unavailable, your entire data set is still available, which means that you are inherently off-sited and you're remote replicated. And since the Panzura filer commits I/O to the back end, to the object store as immutable, our customers, although they don't believe this statement at the beginning, they do towards the end of our engagement, they don't do backups. The reason they don't do backups is because Panzura is inherently immune to ransomware. We're inherently immune to ransomware because everything is immutable on the back end. So when you drop a file into San Francisco, for example, and it gets committed to the object store on the back end, when there are changes to that file, even deletions of part of the data in that file, all of that information is always additive. So if you have Microsoft VSS on a Windows machine, for example, you can right-click on it, go to Properties, and look at the previous versions of that file and revert to that previous version, or make a copy of that previous version to another place in the file system, and then start using that. So what happens when you get hit with ransomware? All it is a brand new encrypted file that's sitting on the previous version. So how do you recover? You revert to the previous file. So what our customers have seen, and a plethora of them have been hit with ransomware, is that they can recover within hours, some recover within days, and then one chose to recover within a week because they wanted to do forensics on exactly what happened and where it came from, and they didn't care how long they were down, which is a unique case. So no customer from Panzura has paid ransomware because of the immutability of our rights. And what they also find is, because it's inherently off-sited, is they don't have to do backups. There's no more of this incremental forever or full backups or any of that, but customers slowly wean themselves off of that. They at first don't believe us, so they do the traditional backups, and they find out that they're never using them because they can revert to any previous version of that file. Then they start doing fulls once a month, and then they find out they don't use those either. And then they do fulls every quarter or every year, and that's just in case, so they could throw it on tape and put it somewhere else. But all of that drives down your cost dramatically. If you don't have to remote replicate, if you don't have to do backups constantly, what our customers are seeing is we end up being between a third and a quarter the total cost of ownership of traditional NAS. Right. So in a public cloud environment or in a private cloud environment or in a hybrid of both, which is what this is showing, imagine having parts of this IBM cause in San Francisco and some of it being in New York and it being erasure coded across both, and then having a VM in the cloud that has access to this global file system, which will then enable all the AI and ML, computer vision, and all that work that can be done across that global file system. No matter which route you go, you're democratizing your data. You're making it available for intelligence that's outside of your traditional corporate environment so that you can run analytics and you can do all that sort of work. So whichever route you choose to go, know that Panzura supports that and that we can work with you to basically democratize your data and get really more out of it, as well as, perhaps save you a little bit of money. So now that my time is up, I'm going to introduce Russ and he'll take you through the rest of this.
Beautiful. Thanks, Glenn. He spoke about the value of Panzura and how it helps with your modernization efforts with your unstructured data. The storage then on the back end becomes the topic of interest. I come from a data protection background with NAS. I worked for some of the biggest vendors in the industry. So managing unstructured data over the last 20 years has been challenging at best. Just to touch on a couple terms, because if you ask 5 storage people what archive means, for example, you're going to get 5 different answers. So from a NAS standpoint, and people ask, what's the difference between a file and an object? The difference is when I put it on an object platform, let's say for an example, an image is an object. If I put it on a NAS, it's a file. Most of you probably know more than I'll ever know about NAS. The top 3 options there are your NAS terms. What I want to differentiate, though, is object. An object is the new platform being used for unstructured data. 3 of the largest distinguishing differentiators I want to point out is think of a file system without folders, where you have all this unstructured data in one bucket. It gives you access to the data and the ability to leverage that data in a different manner, in a more useful manner. So having front-end products like Panzura that write that data on the back end, providing you the ability to use that data as an object, is becoming very demanding and very useful and valuable to the customers. It's a big folder structure without folder naming conventions. And then S3 is the protocol used to write that data to those folders, not to be confused with the tier of storage in AWS. S3 is that default protocol equivalent to SMB and NFS. And then the equivalent to a share in NAS in an object world is bucket or a vault. Okay, and then the 3 major use cases, and this is what we like about Panzura, is that they automate these use cases, because these are the biggest demands for your data, is the ability to migrate or move that data from source to target. These are all the challenges that customers are experiencing with large NAS environments. Is how do I move the data? Every time I refresh the hardware, I have to move the data from point A to point B, or source to target. And then archiving and tiering. You think about HSM solutions over the past 20 years, it was nothing more than a concept. You didn't have solutions out there that really did a great job of archiving or tiering the data. And that's one of the reasons why you see a big swing or big shift from these large NAS appliances to these feature-rich solutions like Panzura, because they inherently have these capabilities built in, where they keep the active data up front and the inactive or cold data on object. It keeps that capability built into your front-end NAS type deployment. And then copy, your data protection strategy, where Glenn spoke about, I don't need to back up my data anymore. He's right, because there's all kinds of data protection strategies built into these solutions now to provide you with the ability to meet whatever data protection requirements that you have or that you need or desire. So data profiles, or, we talk about the data, and object isn't there to displace NAS. You're always going to have a NAS or CIFS protocol demand. And that's where Panzura comes in. So if you look at the table on the left, he spoke about the small percentage of data that's active. That would be the green. So that would be where Panzura covers the front end of the data, and it's moving all the inactive data to the object platform in the rear, which is about, let's say, 90% of the data. So you're taking it all off that high expensive NAS tier of storage. If you look at traditional NAS and you look at some of the big vendors out there that leverage strategies like snapshots and replication and snap archiving and things like that, you're probably looking at somewhere around $1,500 a terabyte, protected terabyte for the green, and the blue storage is around $250 a terabyte. So it goes to show the compelling desire to keep that inactive data on a more appropriate tier like object, and using something like Panzura to manage that data between the two tiers. It generates, the end result is a very compelling ROI with a total solution where you're no longer chasing the queen, so to speak, and throwing storage at this growing repository of unstructured data. When you hear people talk about big data growth and large buckets of data, it's typically a result of mismanaging inactive unstructured data. So these were the driving demands of object. Not to mention, he spoke about the inability to protect these large amounts of data. If you think about data protection strategies over the last 10 years, you've incorporated deduplication, incrementals forever, differentials, block level deduplication. All of these strategies trying to protect large amounts of data that just didn't work. And the data protection strategy did not scale with the data growth, driving the demand for more feature-rich solutions like Panzura and Object as a total end-to-end solution. So I want to talk about some of the compelling differentiators between our on-prem solutions and our public cloud solutions. So I represent object storage from IBM as solutions. And most of our customers, if not all of them, have a cloud-first initiative. And I want to differentiate some of them to help you identify what's a better solution to go to, whether it's an on-premise solution, a total public cloud solution, or some kind of hybrid approach where you're leveraging both. So these are some of the strong bullet points. So first off, you look at the compliance requirements. If you look at the default configurations for public cloud, they typically don't meet the compliance requirements. To meet a lot of the compliance requirements, you've got to, for example, for FedRAMP, you need to replicate from one data center to another. And that's not in a default configuration for a lot of these public cloud environments. Those are add-ons. So you want to be careful when you look at the public cloud to ensure the solution you're choosing meets the compliance requirements, and you add those into your storage policy. And then one of the biggest for on-prem versus public cloud is what we call the operational costs. So you don't just pay for storage per terabyte in the public cloud, you also pay for utilization. So the reads, the writes, the puts, the gets, those are commands that you run against object storage in the public cloud that you don't pay for on-prem. And unfortunately, it's pretty difficult to try to model that profile to identify what the public cloud costs are going to be, because it's hard to forecast not only the growth, but what those reads, writes are going to be, because you pay for it per command. So you want to be careful about that, because we get a lot of customers where they just forecast the storage and they get their bill after the first month and it's triple because of the utilization charges or the operational charges or what we call the commands. And then CapEx versus OpEx. Depending on your cost model that you're looking for, on-prem Office offers a CapEx model, public cloud offers an OpEx model. So just like your car, do I like to lease a car? Do I like to buy a car? Do I mind the monthly, or is it CapEx? So you want to identify what that is. And then performance. Obviously, we're all going to be familiar with latency. Can I sustain the latency introduced by a public cloud solution? Do I want to put all my data in the public cloud or some of it on-prem? That's where you start looking at the hybrid approach. And then security. You look at the federal customers, none of them want to put data in the public cloud, all the way up to the hospitals and healthcare environments where they want to leverage the public cloud because it's typically shared data, and that's typically the best place to share the data. So having control over your data and infrastructure is key, where you have a lot more control when it's on-prem without the sharing capability, while in the public cloud you can share it among the public, but you have less control over it. And then obviously the hardware resources associated with on-premise solutions. You want to ensure that the solution you implement on-prem, you're not necessarily married to a solution, because these large data lake unstructured environments tend to grow. So unlike your traditional NAS or flash environments where everybody's used to refreshing them every couple of years because it's only maybe a couple hundred terabytes, where it's easy to do a hardware refresh, try to do a 5 petabyte hardware refresh that's non-disruptive. It gets more challenging. You want to ensure that what solution you go with on-prem, you can do a refresh, a non-disruptive refresh, and you don't have any kind of vendor lock-in associated with that solution. So those are some of the biggest compelling reasons. Again, I want to put a little more focus on the cost. The cost per terabyte in the public cloud versus on-prem. So here's a tool I put together to try to help customers model what their storage costs are going to be in the public cloud. As you can see, it's very complex. Anybody could identify, hey, we're going to have 500 terabytes in the public cloud over the next couple of years. Okay, that's fine. But how many files are you going to write? What's the average file size? Because those costs can double, if not triple, your storage costs in the public cloud. So you want to be aware of those, and that's what is challenging a lot of the customers that we're up against, and forcing a lot of customers to move from the public cloud back to on-prem because they weren't able to forecast and they got bit by it after the fact. Here's an example of just a quick model where the storage costs alone. So in this example, you've got 5 petabytes using a 2 cents a gig a month. Compare that 5 petabytes in the public cloud. You can see there's no usable operational cost included in this cost model. If you extrapolate 5 petabytes at 2 cents a gig a month, which is an average cost for an S3 tier of storage in any public cloud, even the IBM cloud and our competitors, 2 cents a gig a month is $21 a terabyte a month, or $21,000 a petabyte a month. As you can see, that 2 cents a gig a month, where they dangle a carrot, so to speak, means a lot when you're in that multi-petabyte range. So extrapolate 5 petabytes out, you're looking at $1.2 million investment a year in that public cloud expense. Out 5 years, that same 5 petabytes unused, your investment in the public cloud to rent that space is $6.3 million. Compare that to an on-premise cost down below, which is about $330 a terabyte, which includes 5 years of maintenance in this table. Your total investment for a 5 petabyte on-prem solution, $1.6 million. Just for storage costs alone for 5 petabytes, your overall savings over 5 years is almost $4.7 million. And all this is the storage behind Panzura. From a storage standpoint alone, the cost differences between on-prem and the public cloud could be substantial. So you definitely want to take that into consideration as you're considering public cloud versus on-prem. Deployment options. Key to understand, and I'm going to go over this briefly, because when you look at a public cloud deployment, you're looking at the top left where everything's in a single site. So that's where it's most efficient. However, you have to look at what is my data protection strategy, and you need one even in the public cloud. In the public cloud, I have a couple options. I can replicate that data to 2 different sites, and then you start questioning, where are those 2 different sites? Are they regional or are they cross-regional? So these are all terms that you want to be familiar with as you're subscribing to public cloud solutions. Is it a single site deployment without geodispersion in the top left? Is it replicated where I've got mirrored copies in the top right? Or if I look below, is my data geodispersed over multiple regions where I've got region protection? You look at Amazon experience a few years ago where a region failed, and a lot of customers, enterprise class customers, lost data because they didn't have that data replicated to another region. And the answer was, well, when you subscribe, you have to understand that and you have to add to it. So that 2 cents a gig a month literally doubles when you replicate the data. So understanding your data placement in the public cloud is also key to understand so that you can cost model appropriately. For those of you that want to follow up or have specific interests or discussion topics you want to talk about, don't hesitate to reach out to either myself or Glenn through either one of us. We could bring in the other party, and we could definitely take a deeper dive into these points of interest. More than happy to.
Thanks everybody for attending. Again, next one is May 27th. Look forward to seeing you there. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.